Greetings, everyone, from Michigan State University, and welcome to EAB University's 2018 Spring Webinar Series, which is funded by the USDA Forest Service. This is Robin Osborne, and along with my EAB University colleagues, Cliff Sadoff and Elizabeth Barnes from Purdue University and Amy Stone from Ohio State University, we welcome you to today's webinar, which is Resources for Jumpstarting Outreach on Invasive Species by Lee Greenwood, who is Outreach Programs Manager, Restoring America's Forests for the Nature Conservancy. She has been in this position since December of 2007, and her work focuses on bringing multiple stakeholders together to achieve common goals in forest health, including managing the international Don't Move Firewood campaign, the Firewood Outreach Coordinating Initiative, and the Firewood Scout Working Group. Lee's leadership of the Don't Move Firewood campaign has led to its being widely regarded as one of the most innovative public outreach arms of the Nature Conservancy. Before we get started today, please know that we welcome your comments and questions, so please feel free to type them in the chat feature, which you can find by mousing over the bottom or occasionally the top of your screen. I'm going to be making notes of all the questions, and we will have Lee respond to them when her presentation is finished. To keep these free webinars coming, we need your feedback. After the webinar, you will be emailed a link to a short voluntary confidential survey that I hope you'll fill out. And if you're one of the first 10 people to fill out the survey, we'll be sending you an EAB goodie bag. For those of you wanting CEUs for EAB University webinars, if you would like a certificate indicating that you participated in today's live webinar, complete the survey and send an email message to Amy Stone at stone.91@osu.edu. You will also receive instructions in an email about how to get this accomplished. This webinar is being recorded and will be available for viewing soon at www.emerald-borer.info on the EAB University page. You'll also find recordings for all our previous EAB University webinars there. And I'd like to thank you all for attending today. And Lee, please share your screen with your presentation and we'll get started.
All right, let's see if I can do this as successfully as I did last time. How'd that go?
Looks good.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks to everyone for having me on Emerald Ash Borer University today. This is a presentation that I gave a different version of at the Entomological Society of America meeting this November, and Cliff Sadoff was at that meeting, and he asked me if I could improve and extend this presentation to a wider audience for Emerald Ash Borer University, and I said, yeah, that sounds fantastic. So here it is. What I'm going to be doing is going through both the resources that I manage as essentially a case study in a group of different outreach and education materials, and then also I'll go into some of the resources that I access or that I suggest to other people for other related topic areas. So I'm going to be focusing on forest pests, definitely a heavy focus on emerald ash borer as one of the most prominent forest pests, but I'll also get into a couple other topics towards the end. So let's do it. So why doesn't it want to go to the next slide? There we go. Okay, so my focus as the manager of Don't Move Firewood is talking about firewood. And so one of the things about firewood that you all definitely understand, but the public does not necessarily understand, is that firewood is a broad pathway for lots of different types of invasive species of forests and trees. So what we try to do is focus on some really key messages, and for this group, these are review, but we'll go through them. You know, forest pests can and do regularly move on firewood. The regulations on firewood are not comprehensive, nor are they consistent between any sort of geographic variations. So it doesn't matter if I'm talking about from state to state, from region to region, from country to country. At no point are they consistent, which makes for an incredibly complicated regulatory environment, as well as a complementary, incredibly complicated educational environment. To make this even more tricky, new pest outbreaks come into light every single year. So we're not always just talking about the same things. We're adding new things with new biologies and new geographic regions, which makes it even more complicated. And of course, friendly reminder when we talk about outreach, you might be doing outreach on emerald ash borer, but it's really important to remember to frame as much as you can in the concept of emerald ash borer is not the only pest of concern. Just because emerald ash borer is not in a particular state doesn't mean that that state has firewood that's completely free to move in theory. So I try to remind everybody that when they work on emerald ash borer in particular. So in terms of the guiding principles that we use for Don't Move Firewood, it's important to sort of center ourselves in what is our actual goal and what are we trying to really, how are we trying to accomplish that goal? So our goal is to protect trees across North America. And the tactic that we are using is only one of many potential tactics. And that is to slow the spread of invasive forest pests via this particular vector. So we're essentially, as my mother would say, we're choosing our battle, and this is our battle. And then, of course, we have to target somebody with this particular tactic. And there's two groups that Don't Move Firewood and the related campaigns target. And those two groups are the public that uses firewood, because obviously the public that doesn't use firewood, I don't really feel like we need to reach them. And then the stakeholder group educators, so folks like everyone pretty much on the phone. So if you work with anyone that might be using firewood, you would be somebody that the Don't Move Firewood campaign would want to speak to, because we can help you with your outreach and improve your outreach. In the picture on the right of that RV is actually an RV that is always parked in between my house and my office. And every spring, I drive by and it kills me because they load that firewood up on that little rack. And finally one year I just broke down and took some pictures of it. And I've been using it as clip art or PowerPoint art every year. But even here in Montana, where we have an absolute plague of dead trees due to the natural cyclical variation of mountain pine beetle infestation, people are still moving firewood on their back of their RVs. We focus on one core message with three solutions to it. The core message is don't move firewood. And then the three different solutions that we present, which can vary in applicability by region and so forth, are either buy it where you burn it, gather it on site, or buy certified heat treated firewood. So that's what we push for the Don't Move Firewood campaign in terms of outreach. Now, I love this map, and I love that USDA APHIS works with the Forest Service in order to republish this map once a month now, which is amazing. It used to be more like once a year for this particular map. But what this is that it's the first point of emerald ash borer detection in a given county. So if there's more than one emerald ash borer in a given county, it only shows up as one dot anyway. It doesn't multiply the dots. But what that shows you is that there's so much, even within the federally quarantined area, that can still be protected by adequate outreach and education. We still can minimize the movement of firewood from the two, let me see if I can use my little pointer feature. We can still minimize movement from these two blobs in, fairly certain that's Arkansas, but somebody's definitely going to correct me if, no, that's not Arkansas. Missouri, sorry, right? Anyway, these two blobs of emerald ash borer and this one here, right? There's all these pieces in the middle that don't have emerald ash borer, all these pieces up here. This entire portion of South Carolina, we can still protect those via adequate outreach, as well as anything outside the federally regulated area. So this map provides a really interesting reminder of how much we could still protect with good outreach. And then, of course, it would be silly not to mention both the entire interior Great Plains area with firewood, being potentially the main vector that would move emerald ash borer so far from those red dots into the green areas. And then the West Coast, all of these ash trees and all of these Colorado River Basin trees here. So, good reminder, that is findable on the USDA APHIS emerald ash borer pages, in case anybody needs to find this particular map. So in order to protect all those areas where we currently do not have emerald ash borer, whether they are within the federally quarantined area or on the outside of it, the Don't Move Firewood campaign, which I manage, has a huge group of outreach materials that are potentially usable by anybody who would like to use them. The main website content that's most applicable to professionals like you all would be our map, which is a summary of all of the rules, regulations, recommendations, and pest infestations of every single state and province across all of North America, with the exception of the fact that we treat Mexico as one giant country. We do not divide it up into states and provinces like we do for the rest of it. And we fact check that map once a year or more, depending on the situation. We just concluded the 2018 start of the year fact checking and rewriting in the last few weeks. I highly urge everybody to go take a look at their particular state and their adjacent states. There is a really good chance that you will be surprised by something that you find on that map. I have been told many times by state plant health directors or park managers and so forth that they had no idea that X was also either in the state or was regulated or had a boundary. So before you do any kind of firewood outreach, I highly recommend you consult that map. And the firewood map is findable on our website right here. It says firewood map, but it's also got a great URL, which is just don'tmovefirewood.org/map. We also have a running series of blogs, which are called Dear Don't Move Firewood, and those are just essentially me, or depending on the time of year, my intern, answering questions. It's the most niche advice column on the internet, and what we basically do is tell people, no, it's illegal to do what you're trying to do. And we say that over and over again, except for when it's not illegal. And then we say, please don't do that. And then occasionally we tell people it's fine. So whatever the real answer is to their firewood question, we provide it, and then we publish it out with pseudonyms so that nobody is actually identifying themselves on the internet. Another resource that we have that is really helpful is our invasive species profiles. They're forest pests and pathogens, even though we just label them invasive species. We don't have any other types like weeds. And they are some of the most complete and scientifically vetted invasive species profiles for forest health related topics that you'll find on the internet. And we keep them as accurate as possible because sometimes this information is incredibly hard to find in aggregate. So you might be able to find your forest health leaflet, which is very helpful, but the leaflet is by its very nature usually 2 pages. And so it's going to not have all the scientific citations, and it's not going to have the outreach materials that correspond to it, or it's not going to have the history of the management of the pest. It might just have the biology of the pest. This has become increasingly helpful in the last few years with new emerging non-federally regulated pests. A good example of that is our profile of velvet longhorn beetle. To the best of my knowledge, is really the only good profile of that pest out there. And our profile of spotted lanternfly has information that I don't think is anywhere else on the internet. So if you need to really dig into what is going on with spotted lanternfly, our invasive species profile is where you can find that. Further, we do have a Spanish language microsite. So if you are looking to reach out to Spanish speakers in the process of your outreach, we have our poster, our brochure, and several other materials and verbiage in Spanish so that you can use that pre-translated, not using a Google translator, so it actually does sound good if you're a native Spanish speaker, materials available for you on the web. Beyond those, we also have guest blogs that we publish on the website of success stories throughout North America. So I solicit from various different state partners, and some people on the phone I've probably actually solicited stories from, of things that they've accomplished that they thought were successful in conducting firewood outreach. And these are often very inspirational in terms of what we did and how many people we reached and what sorts of published materials we used. And they're just good ways to kind of get your creative juices flowing in terms of what you think you could accomplish. And you can also, learn from failures. I do encourage people to mention things that they tried that failed, or that they feel like maybe they wouldn't just do again because they kind of flopped. It's a little different from a big failure. So those things are within our blog, which is helpful. Additionally, we have a For Professionals resource page. And in the For Professionals resource page, which I'll get to later, we have a whole series of different curated lists of outreach materials according to professional needs. And I'll get to that in a moment. Oh, and then this is another plug for our invasive species profiles. I already went into that. Next up, we have our Firewood Outreach Coordinating Initiative, which Robin so nicely mentioned in my intro. That is a newsletter and webinar series, and I highly recommend everybody sign up for the newsletters. You can either follow the link or write it down here at the bottom. It's just /newsletter-sign-up, or that big yellow box on our webpage anywhere, that sign up for our e-newsletter box on the right-hand side in this graphic, that takes you to the sign-up page, so you can find it either way. The newsletter itself is mostly monthly. We do it 10 times a year. And we cover almost entirely topics related to firewood, but sometimes we delve into forest pests that do not move on firewood, or just sort of topics of great interest to forest health protection. So comment periods of really high interest to the types of professionals that subscribe to the newsletter, or other sort of tangentially important topics. So please, everybody, sign up if you are interested, and I promise we don't share that list with anybody outside the group. This is one of the Firewood Outreach Coordinating Initiative newsletter webinars for the year. So that For Professionals page that I had mentioned, you can access that by going to Resource Library here, and that'll bring up on the left, it's a little bit hidden, sorry about that. On the left, it'll bring up a For Professionals link, and that takes you to the For Professionals page. And it's got all these cool lists. So for instance, if you want to learn about ways that you can target to bird watchers, we have a bird watchers handout. If you want to look up our giant list of materials from the past that had to do with Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week, we have a huge list of materials that we're actually going to be checking through and refreshing in the next couple of weeks to get ready for Emerald Ash Borer Awareness Week at the end of May. You can look up information on our newsletter. You can learn about Firewood Month, which is a cooperative effort between our program and Hungry Pests, by going to the Firewood Month toolkits. I won't go through all of them, but what you see is that if you're looking to schedule out an outreach year and you want to sort of cheat and figure out, your top 3 outreach items for each event during the year, this is a great place to just make your life a lot faster. And just go ahead and pick them all up, put them in, your editorial calendar, and move on instead of having to recreate the wheel. So if anybody has ever any questions, of course, like Robin said, please put them in the chat box, and I'll address them at the end. And if you need any of these URLs, I do try to keep the URLs really short whenever possible. So for instance, this one is For Professionals with a hyphen, and that's it. Some of the materials that you can access in our resource library include big scale things like roadside signs. That's a roadside sign in California on the top left with a CAL FIRE employee posing next to it. Our standardized posters, we have 2 different posters in 3 different languages that you can grab. That's that Buy It Where You Burn It with the Fire poster in the center top. That is me looking incredibly enthusiastic about our sandwich boards that we deploy all over the state of Montana. Montana 2 years ago had a first ever occurrence of a viable zebra mussel larvae in their water bodies. And so since then, there have been dozens of boat check stations deployed around the state of Montana, and I live in Montana, so I know some of the folks that put out those boat stations, and I know some of the folks that work with them, and so we did a cooperative agreement essentially with them to put these firewood signs next to the boat check stations so that anybody with these big vehicles coming from out of state, of course, very high quality targeting for firewood movement, would learn a little bit about what Montana wants you to not do and, not bring in firewood. And it also includes, if you already did bring in firewood, please burn it immediately upon arrival and so forth. So those are these great sandwich boards that we do in cooperation with those boat check stations. And then on the bottom is this billboard that we did about 14 different placements of surrounding the state of Wyoming just prior to the eclipse. So all of these things are specialized, locally appropriate campaigns that you can take a look at examples of on our resource pages or on our success story blog and sort of learn from them and think about, you know, would this be appropriate for your state? And if so, how could you take the lessons of Wyoming or Montana or California and make them into outreach items that work for your state? I don't want this to be an exclusive webinar all about me because that is just not productive and helpful. So I thought I would also list out a whole bunch of other outreach sources that I find to be really helpful when I'm moving away from just the firewood topic and closer to a forest health, forest pest topic. So away from the pathway and into the actual insects themselves. And the three ones that I wanted to highlight, and I'm not just pandering to you guys over at Purdue, I think that the handouts at NAB, Neighbors Against Bad Bugs, which is part of the Purdue Extension System, is a particularly great example of targeting outreach to the people that most need it. So neighbors and people who are concerned about their neighborhood, you know, getting an actual flow chart of how they can help save trees, I think is really helpful. That is an example of an area where emerald ash borer has been for a long time, and those trees are in moist soils. And this is important because the Be a Smart Ash campaign, which of course has the best name of all the campaigns, which is centered in Denver, Colorado, is an example of a place where emerald ash borer has not yet arrived, but it's in Boulder, which is very nearby. And they have a very dry western soil where the ash trees struggle much harder. And so the type of replacement criteria and the sort of action flow for a member of a neighborhood is a little bit different. I wanted to highlight those two. When you talk about outreach, each of them is regionally appropriate, but for instance, some of the recommendations of NAB would not work in the Denver area. So the Be a Smart Ash people have some really great materials. They have a very heavy web presence. It's very professional looking, and some really hilarious videos. So if you are not in a state with a moist soil that lets ash trees really thrive, and in an area, and if you're not in an area with already pre-existing heavy emerald ash borer infestation, you might want to check out the Be a Smart Ash materials and suggestions. The other thing too that I've always really liked is if you're talking about children in a camp setting or a school setting, or any kind of setting where they're going to be able to sit down and actually accomplish something, the Plant Heroes materials are really great. And what those are is a series of different forest health as well as a few non-forest health invasive species that have a comic book, some curriculum, and other materials built around each specific pest. And they each have a cool sort of person that fights them. And in the case of emerald ash borer, it's a Pony Star, who is a Native American young lady who tries to save her ash trees from the threat of emerald ash borer. But in other locations, it's other types of heroes. You know, so the personified little cartoon character for coconut rhinoceros beetle is a Native Hawaiian person, for instance. The other thing on Plant Heroes that you'll find is they have a big curriculum list. You know, Project Learning Tree is a very, very well-known and famous curriculum list, but it is enormous. And obviously it incorporates so much beyond just forest pests that you can really get lost in Project Learning Tree. So if you want to not get lost and stay within maybe a little bit safer territory in terms of not going down the rabbit hole of lots of different types of curriculum, the curriculum listing on Plant Heroes is pretty good for that because you don't get, it's not so overwhelming. So I definitely recommend that in concept for looking up outreach items for children. Two other groups of note that I wanted to mention are the North American Invasive Species Management Association, which is NASMA or NASMA, depending on who you ask. And they are becoming, it's a multi-year transfer of intellectual property process, essentially, the managers of the Play Clean Go campaign, which you may be familiar with. Play Clean Go is most highly used in the western side of the Great Lakes, as well as increasingly in the general Great Plains and Pacific Northwest area where I live. It is a very durable and adaptable campaign that's got lots of great imagery. It works for lots of different types of invasive species between forest pests and weeds and other materials that could be transported. And it's a focus on people that are active outside, so from mountain bikers to ATVers to horseback riders, etc. Play Clean Go and Don't Move Firewood have a very friendly relationship. We respect that you have different outreach targets and different outreach needs between the two, and so I've always had a really great relationship with the folks that run that program. They have firewood related materials as well, and those were made after some really good conversations between the two groups to make sure that they worked both ways. So I highly recommend that you check out the continuing education on NASMA, and then specifically if you need outreach materials related to outdoor recreationalists that are less firewood focused and more focused on a broader invasive species message, you check out Play Clean Go. They have some cool posters and handouts and stuff as well. And then another thing that everyone should know about is that National Invasive Species Awareness Week happens every year. It's next week this year, which is a great coincidence. Most of the events for National Invasive Species Awareness Week are in DC. They are focused on legislative accomplishments and educating the Congress people and senators and their aides, especially because that's much more realistic, on invasive species issues and the Invasive Species Caucus and things like that. But it's really helpful to sort of see what is going on in DC and see maybe if your local person is somebody that you should be talking to. And so I find that effort to be really fascinating from a bigger perspective, not grassroots, but grass tops, as they say. So I highly recommend everybody take a quick peek at that at the end of the webinar. And then I realized that I actually forgot one of the best educational resources as I was talking. I'm a little mortified by that, but if everybody could please remember to also check out hungrypests.org. That is a big program of USDA APHIS. They have outstanding resources. They don't have a lot of kid-related stuff, but they do have a lot of really good outreach for professionals as well as for just adults in general, the general public. And so that things like ID cards, posters, general information, landing pages. So if you have a particular pest in your state or area and you need to refer people out for further information, go to, sometimes the Hungry Pests page is going to be the most appropriate page for that. So that's a really great resource that I absolutely should have included on this other groups of note slide. And so yes, it's hungrypests.org. So let's talk about a couple fun things while we're at it, because I like talking about the fun stuff that we do as outreach professionals. One of the really fun things that I love doing is sending out my costumes across the country. So we have a whole group, well, 3 now, of costumes. We have an Asian longhorn beetle, which is the guy on the left. We have 2 emerald ash borers, which is the guy on the right. And actually, the very first emerald ash borer costume I believe ever made was made by the mother of a woman who is on this phone call, Jody Ellis. And so she is the inspiration for all of this, and I just wanted to give her a shout out while she's on the phone. These costumes are amazing, and at this point we typically send them to a minimum of 20 different public events that have large groups of people, where the best way to attract people is to put somebody in a ridiculous costume. Now, when you're talking about this, which is the Metro Detroit Youth Day with Metro Detroit Lions, that's the gentleman in the center, you know, it's really hard to get attention unless you're wearing a crazy insect costume. And then this is this is a Smokey bear, the real Smokey bear from the Forest Service, and then a Nature Conservancy employee named Trish, who's down in Tennessee, trying to get better attention on the grounds of the entrance center to Great Smoky Mountain National Park. So they put in place a major firewood regulation change about 2 years ago, and they wanted to make sure that people knew about it and that people understood it was important, but then also just that people were paying attention. And so we sent them a bunch of costumes, and they liked the costumes so much that they had their own ones built, and they are the permanent property of the national park down there. So there's actually 2 other costumes down in Tennessee forever to be used for public outreach on forest pests and pathogens. We also are, as I like to joke, world leaders in the put your head in an oval and take a picture campaign. We've got not just these 2, but actually I think 6 other head and aboard fun items that we've created through the last couple years. So, you know, these are set up in places where people might ordinarily walk by your booth or ignore you or avoid making eye contact with you, which does sometimes happen, as I'm sure you're all familiar with if you're doing a big public setting. And instead, when people see these with the ovals and somebody says, why don't you, take a picture, I'll take your picture with your phone, they end up putting these hilarious pictures on Instagram, on Facebook, on Snapchat, whatever it is. And you'll notice that the URLs are on here. So for Don't Move Firewood, it'd be really hard to crop that URL out. For Firewood Scout, it's pretty darn close to the people's faces. It's pretty funny. And so as the world leaders of put your head in an oval and a board educational items, I wanted to make sure everybody saw these. And these, the one on the left is actually one of those nifty vinyl pop-up banners that we basically designed the whole thing with these 2 ovals printed onto it and then extremely carefully cut them out with fabric scissors. And that was that. And they look awesome and people love taking pictures of them. So I wanted to make sure everybody saw that fun idea. Another 2 fun ideas that we've done is we've done Frisbees, and those Frisbees say watch out for trees. They're tremendously popular with kids at booths, and they're really economical. They're not very expensive. If you order them in big bulk, they're like 30 cents a pop or something, which is great. And then for anybody who's familiar with cornhole, I don't know how regional this game is, but what it is it's just boards with holes in them. And then you set up the 2 boards and you throw these bean bags at the holes. And it's a great thing at a country fair or, any other kind of outdoor event where people might stop by and play with something for a minute so that you can actually talk to them. And in Vermont, they actually made the boards, they hand painted the boards so that they look like ash barks, the sort of V-shaped furrows. And then they made the holes for the game D-shaped, even though normally the holes for the game are perfect circles, but they made them D-shaped. And then you throw these emerald ash or adult bean bags into the D-shaped holes. So it's an amazing conversation piece, really cool program. And I did not come up with that idea, just for the record. It was Meredith Whitney in Vermont, and she makes some really awesome outreach materials, but I helped her figure out how to get it all done, so how to print the fabric and so forth. So these sorts of fun ideas, are only useful if they work for you, but there's so many good ideas out there. The other thing I wanted to highlight for everybody is that for many years, the Don't Move Firewood campaign has provided free outreach materials to the best of our abilities and budget via the mail. And we have a order form this year to help me order enough of them. And those outreach materials include temporary tattoos in emerald ash borer, Asian longhorn beetle, gold spotted oak borer, gypsy moth caterpillar, and gypsy moth adult, as well as 3 different sticker designs, which are Don't Move Firewood Campfire, the Buy It Where You Burn It sticker, or the That's What Tree Said sticker. Now, all of this information is online. You don't have to write it down. Then we also have 3 different handouts that we're doing. We're doing these postcards, which is, this is the front and back of the postcard that you see in front of you, as well as our national brochure in English and our national brochure in Spanish. In order to order these items, you can either go to don'tmovefirewood.org/blog, and the top blog is the webinar blog, which is the next link there. Webinar resources, Jumpstarting, Outreach, Invasive Species, February 22nd. And I've put the link in there for you to order. As soon as you go there, you'll see what I mean. The reason I can't put that link somewhere more popular is that if it becomes spammed, it's going to destroy my ordering process. And so what I'm going to do is I'll keep it up there until like Wednesday of next week, and then I'm going to delete it. So please get your orders in as soon as possible. I will also be distributing that link in my Firewood Outreach Coordinating newsletter for both February, which I already did, and then March, which I will be doing probably March 7th, possibly March 17th. You can order a lot of materials. It's a limit of 1,000 per type. So considering we've got 6 different types of tattoos, you could end up with 6,000 tattoos if you wanted. Okay, so that is the end of my formal presentation. Robin had asked me to keep it under 45 minutes, and I think I hit 30 on the nose, which I'm pretty pleased with. So let's see if I can turn off my pointer and get that chat box open. I'm having trouble figuring it out. There we go. Oops, I'm sorry, I closed the screen sharing. Let's do the best we can here.
Oh, that's okay. It says, Judy Brown says, we made a vinyl face in a hole display and find that the kids want to lean on it and it's not stable. How do you keep yours from tipping over?
Ooh, you know, that's a problem. And when it's windy, it tips over too. I think we just sandbagged it and then just did, and it's usually right next to a staff booth. So just adult supervision. It really is a problem. Our plywood one does not tip over because we built it really, really sturdy, but it's really heavy. So it's kind of a problem if your booth is like way at the back of the field from the parking area. And then if you look too, we have some that are built as these sort of plywood and vinyl structures that were used on the National Mall for cherry blossom celebration. And those are much more permanent and much more expensive, but they are indestructible. So there's a lot of different options. You kind of just got to get creative.
Okay, and Cliff wants to know if he can post your webinar resources in the chat box.
Oh yeah, the link to the webinar resources. Okay, let me see if I can just get that without closing up anything. Well, if you go like this, if you go to don'tmovefirewood.org/blog, it is the first blog that you come to, and you'll see it right away. But I'd be happy to also put it in another way if I can.
All right, looks good. This has been great. You know, it's kind of nice to have a discussion where you can consolidate where all these resources are and that kind of thing for outreach, because you know we do get asked questions, and even though we're kind of all over the country as far as communication and that kind of thing, it's nice to see all these things in one spot. Now we can figure out where it is. So this has been great. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome. And Jody and Robin were joking about the costumes. They are really, really hot in summer, and our new costume design is more modular, so that you can wear it with shorts and a t-shirt and not get so hot, because it can be pretty miserable. And then also, if you wear them over and over again and they're not modular, you can't clean them. They start to smell really terrible. So somebody asks about companies that harvest timber in Indiana restricted to where they can move lumber. That's such an interesting question, because lumber and timber are regulated in an entirely different fashion than firewood. Firewood has a legal definition that excludes lumber and timber. So you would actually need to, consult the Department of Agriculture or another person such as the Department of Forestry. I'm not sure for Indiana who it would be. Somebody else can answer that. But it's going to be a totally different answer than it would be for firewood. Which is not really an intuitive difference. And it's really important to ask those questions.
Yeah, I know that moving ash lumber, like you say, ash timber and or even Ash Products, there's like a quarantine, a USDA quarantine, and that information for Indiana is available on the emeraldashboard.info website. If you just want to get on there and Google quarantine restrictions Indiana, that information will probably come up for you.
Yes. Okay. Another question that just came up is there a way to turn the Don't Move Firewood into a positive message? Yes, we have 3 positive messages, and you have to pick which of the 3 works for you. The 3 positive messages that we use are buy it where you burn it, gather firewood on site, or purchase heat-treated firewood. The problem is that in the western half of the United States, there is no commercial availability of heat-treated firewood, so it's not applicable. Likewise, buy it where you burn it is not always a great message in areas that have very strict regulations with regards to certified heat-treated firewood. So for instance, you can buy firewood 20 miles away from Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and they won't let you bring it in because it's not heat-treated firewood, even though you did buy it locally. So it's very difficult to create one positive message that is universally applicable, which is why we start with the Don't Move Firewood, because that's the closest we've got to universally applicable. And then we move into the 3 other positive messages like you're looking for, according to what actually makes sense for the part of the country and the regulatory environment that you're in. It's a really tricky issue. We get asked this all the time, and there's no really great answer because there's so much regional variation. I see Mary is asking for getting the link. Robin answered that. Excellent. And then are there photos under the blog tab of the stickers, etc., that are available to order? There are. I can include them on the blog. I should. I hadn't yet gotten to that, honestly. Just didn't quite get to it, but I can do it as soon as we're done with this webinar.
Okay, are there other questions while we're here? This has been really informative, and I hope all of my participants here on the EAB University have now kind of feel more enlightened about what's out there for us.
Yeah, and if anybody needs to reach me, thank you, Cliff. Please just email me. I really look forward to hearing from people in general. You know, running a national campaign, sometimes you don't know all of the individual state and regional concerns that people are dealing with. And so hearing from you individually helps me be more responsive in terms of what resources we create in the future.
All right, that sounds good. I'm going to close up the meeting, and I want